these entrepreneurs are doing between $20 to $30 million a year in their business. These businesses have between 50 to 100 people. They created a significant level of success. And the two people I'm thinking of in particular, their level of negative self-talk, the level to which they beat themselves up, how merciless, ruthless, and cruel they are to themselves, how much they question themselves, it will make your head spin. And this has been one of the core things we've been working on. And so I was like, okay, let me just really unpack the architecture of this. And this is going to be useful for you guys too. To put it really simply, the reason why, so first of all, the brain has a negativity bias. 80% of our thoughts are typically negative. And the reason for this is that we are evolved to maximize our chances of survival. So we're constantly scanning for threat, danger, and problems so that we can avoid them. Of course, our environment has changed significantly compared to the environment we were designed for. So most of those threats don't actually exist physically. They exist in our mind. So those threats get created in our mind, and our mind creates the perception of a problem. And from day to day, about 95% of our thoughts are the same as the day before, same as the day before. So 80% are typically negative. That's what the research has found. And 95% are from the previous day, and so on. So there is a vortex of negativity that most human beings live inside. Now, the reason why we bias so much towards negative self-talk and basically seeing ourselves in a negative light, and I actually see this as an addiction. This is an addiction of the mind. And when we see it through the lens of addiction, everything makes sense. So an addiction is me engaging in a behavior compulsively without the element of choice or agency to not do it because of an impulse I have and because of some sort of reward I get. So what is the reward? First of all, so the brain is a prediction making machine. So the brain is actually a computational structure that's always making predictions about the present and future, what's going to happen. And the way it does that is by using the past as data. So my brain's always trying to predict what's going to happen next. Now, for most people, when we are truly aware of the fact that anything is possible, that opens up a profound level of uncertainty because we're living in a field of infinite possibility. Anything can happen in this next moment. Like a plane could come crashing down and crash right there. A zebra could theoretically just come charging through the storm. It's not impossible. So our brain is also deeply uncomfortable with vast amounts of uncertainty. To mitigate that discomfort, what the brain does is it tries to make a prediction where it can be proven right. So our need to be right is far greater than our need to be happy and to feel good. So what we do is this addictive cycle is I make predictions. I make negative predictions about myself. Then I find the evidence to support that prediction. And I say, oh, I'm right. I was right. See, I was right. I am a piece of shit. I am worthless. I can't make money. I can't find a partner. Love is not for me, blah, 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 blah. And every time I do that, because now I have the power to prove myself right, because on the positive side, I may not have the immediate feedback and the immediate evidence. So I'll have to go into not knowing if I'm not used to operating in that positive place with myself. So if I go negative, then I have an immediate sense that I'm right. I'm right about this. And when I prove myself right, I release, all of us, we release a cluster of neurochemicals, including dopamine. And now I feel this hit, almost this high from being right. So now the addictive cycle is in place. And all I'm doing is relentlessly confirming these negative beliefs and thoughts that I have about myself. And even though I feel shitty, I get off on being right about feeling shitty about myself. Game, set, match. Now the cycle is locked, and then I loop around that. And each time I loop around that, there's a process called myelination, which is the connective structure around neurons. So every time I have a thought, literally what's happening in the brain is that there's a connection being formed between two neurons. And often many neurons creates a neural network. The more I have that, the more times I repeat that thought, practice that thought, that myelin sheath that connects those neurons gets thicker and thicker. Basically, it turns a dirt road or a trail through the forest where there isn't really a path. It turns that into a superhighway. So the more times I practice that thought, that belief, that perspective, that narrative, the more it strengthens that pathway in the brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So now it becomes easier and easier and easier for me to have that thought. And now, because it's so much easier for me to have that thought, it becomes a preferential pathway in the brain. So it's just like ski slopes in America, where there's 1,000 people who already carved out the path. The most obvious path for me down the hill, down the mountain, is going to be along the path that's already been carved. It's actually not going to be easy for me to go off the path that's been carved. So now, if I want to think positive thoughts about myself, it feels really hard. It feels unfamiliar. It feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. It feels new. And so when I meet that discomfort, I'm like, oh, I bounce back and I go back to the well-grooved pathway. I take the superhighway because it's just so much easier. The process of changing our relationship to self, the process of thinking better feeling thoughts, of having better feeling beliefs, of making better feeling predictions requires us to first meet that discomfort and hold ourselves there till that discomfort dissipates. And the first time it's going to feel awkward, like a newborn giraffe trying to walk. The second time will feel awkward, maybe a little bit less. The third time, a little bit less. Over time, it becomes the preferential pathway, and we effortlessly think good thoughts about ourselves. And therefore, the reality we create is directly a reflection of that. And that's not where it stops, though. The map that I want to give you is that thinking well about ourselves is not the destination. The destination is not thinking about ourselves at all. Any activity of the self is suboptimal to no activity of the self. The goal here, if there is a goal, is to allow the self to completely recede. And all our mental activity is about contribution, where I'm not thinking about myself. I'm thinking about what I can offer to others, how I can support all the other beings around me. That is the state of love. Love is not about receiving. Love is about what I can give, what I can offer, what I can contribute. And when we are in that place, we're optimally being used by the universe. We're in that state of love. When we're doing that in an authentic way, that is the highest expression of a human being, because we're not thinking about ourselves, right? We're just thinking about how can I help? And that is the most optimal state for a human being to be, because we feel amazing. We're basically in a kind of flow state. We're not focusing on ourselves and what's missing with us and what's wrong with us and our problems. We're not even thinking about how we're so great, because that's just the flip side of that duality. Anytime I'm attached to thinking really well about myself, I'm immediately creating the opposite possibility. So the ideal place to be is to break out of that duality completely, where I'm so good with myself that I don't even need to think about myself. Not all the time. It's helpful to come back to self in a positive way, because we all fall out of tune. But when we can be anchored, we have such a strong, robust foundation of love and care and attunement with ourselves. Naturally, the focus just comes off ourselves and onto others, and what we can offer and how we can love the world and all the people in it. Basically, what I'm saying is that any activity of the self, in a way, puts us in lack. Any self-focus puts us a little bit in lack. Negative self-focus puts us very much in lack. Positive self-focus, less. But the state of pure abundance is actually the felt sense of nothing being missing, nothing being wrong, everything being perfect. And that comes from my connection to source. So when I'm connected to source, and that's what the state of prayer is, by the way, as well. Prayer is not about asking for things we don't have. Prayer is about feeling the gratitude, the overwhelming gratitude for all the abundance that is already here. So real abundance is actually the state of nothing being missing, nothing being lacking. And the only way I can truly access that is by completely downregulating the activity of the cell. So I can't be negatively perceiving myself, nor is there a need to positively perceive myself. I'm just not focused on myself at all. And we see this when you can see all of these examples of the flow state, right? People who are surfing. In that moment, there's so much happening. They're so present, they're so focused that there's a complete downregulation of their sense of self, their default mode network. They're not thinking about themselves. There's so much that they're focused on. And that's why surfing is so addictive, because it's that feeling of, oh my God, this is incredible. Skiing is another one. Playing the piano. Musicians in general, when you see musicians on stage and for a couple of hours, they're just so immersed. They become one with the activity that they're performing. They're merging with God. And that's why when someone watches a musician on stage, that's why people go to live music, right? We listen to the same thing on Spotify, but we go in person because there's a magic that we're witnessing. And there are these jam bands. There's one called Fish. I've never seen them live, but they're basically jamming in that flow state for 8-10 hours. And people go to those shows, they do LSD, which basically causes chemically the same state. And they're basically just in this flow state with the musicians. We're in a flow state for hours and hours. And they follow them across the country. And the music they never repeat the music because it's all being improvised in that flow state. If we want to tap into abundance, truly, like true abundance is that state of being completely absorbed with the things that turn us on. And that's why if we're into history, us being all about the history, recording a podcast about history, talking about history to someone, in that moment, we're so absorbed by the thing that we're so passionate about that we're not thinking about how something's missing, what we need to do to engineer this event or acquire this possession or thing or get this job or get this client or anything like that. Causes us to become the most attractive force in the universe.